If you can't hear me, stop at any point in time. I'm a very loud person though, so I doubt that'll be a problem. So on the agenda, it says that manure as a valuable nutrient or nitrogen source. I altered this slightly. I think it's more than just nitrogen, but we'll talk about nitrogen first, then we'll talk about some of the other nutrients. So manure value depends very much on a number of factors, not just the nutrient content, because you can get a sample and that doesn't tell you a whole lot, because it doesn't really matter what that sample is if you don't know what crop you're feeding, right? You don't just go out and spread fertilizer on your crops or on your land, not knowing what you're going to plant next year, right? Please tell me nobody's doing that. Okay. So you need to know what crop you're feeding. You need to know about your soil type and the health of that soil. So there's more to manure than just the nutrients. As most people already know, we're adding organic matter. We're building soil health when we're using manure. So knowing that and where you're at as far as soil health goes. So if you have a field that has lower soil health already, that field is going to benefit from manure more than a field that already has pretty high soil health categories. Credits? Yeah, credits. That's maybe not quite the right word either, but it's already got higher organic matter. Maybe it's more productive. So your more productive soils aren't going to get as much benefit as your lower productive soils. And then it depends on whether or not, and this is probably the biggest one here today, is that complementary fertilizer practices. How many are using manure on their farms already? That's awesome. How many are reducing their fertilizer by the amount of manure that's on there? I'm crediting that. That's great. If you're not, come see me, because we definitely need to talk. So going back to this big yellow bubble here, if you don't need something and you don't need that, so if you don't need a particular nutrient, is it worth it? Would you apply it? Would you go to the co-op and buy fertilizer for phosphorus if your soil test was at 200 parts per million? Hopefully not, right? So that factors into that value of manure, which we'll get into in a bit. So manure does have some intrinsic value, not just that nutrient content value. We can actually improve water quality with manure. That seems counterintuitive for some, because when we think of manure, in many cases, we're thinking of catastrophes that happen, a manure spill that kills a bunch of fish, that kind of thing. Those things sure can happen, but we can improve water quality by holding that water in the soil, and manure can help that. So we can improve infiltration with manure. It's been proven to do that. And it can decrease the amount of runoff that we have on our fields, depending on the type of soil that you're on. I talked a little bit about soil health. Very hard to put an economic number on that. But if you have more productive soils, it's worth more, right? So it's hard to put a number on it, but that is something that we need to consider with using manure. How many have ever seen manure or seen a field where it hadn't had manure before? And when you, maybe the first year, maybe the second year after using manure, you saw a huge yield bump? Have you seen that? Very, very common. If you haven't used manure recently, maybe the last 3 to 5 years, you're going to often see that yield bump. We don't know exactly what causes it, whether it's the micronutrients in manure, whether it's the organic matter that we're adding, or maybe it's just the microbial action that we're adding because we're adding bacteria to the soil that makes it mineralized. Maybe those nutrients are more available than commercial fertilizer. We don't know exactly why, but we usually will see a yield bump if we haven't been using manure in the past, or at least not recently. And then the other really important value, especially in today's fertilizer market, is that manure is right down the road. It's a local source. We don't have to truck it in and pay for somebody to bring it to us. Usually you can knock on a neighbor's door. This year might be a little different because a lot of people are wanting manure that haven't in the past because fertilizer prices are so high. But in many cases, you can just knock on the neighbor's door, and sometimes they'll even give it to you because they need to get rid of it somewhere. Hopefully that's happening less and less as we're realizing the value of that manure. So we're going to talk about crediting nutrients. This is the new, so last summer we updated our nitrogen availability factors, which is what you're seeing here. This is the ammonium portion of manure. So this is like the urine portion of manure because you don't usually keep them separate, right? So the ammonium in manure is not always available because where does it go? Into the atmosphere, right? So there isn't a whole lot that changed on this other than this sprinkler irrigated manure, or yeah, sprinkler irrigated. So like when you're dewatering your lagoons and you're holding ponds and things. If you're applying at a lower level, only 40% of that is going to be available because we figure that much is probably going to be lost to the atmosphere. Whereas if you're putting on a larger amount, you're putting it on heavier, you can consider about 80% available of that ammonium nitrogen. And the reason for that is because it gets worked into the soil, so it's not on the surface to volatilize. That irrigation water that water pushes it down into the soil so we don't lose it as fast. The other thing to note with ammonium nitrogen is because of that volatility of it, when we incorporate it, we get to keep most of that. But if we let it sit on the surface, particularly if we let it sit there for very long, we lose almost all of that ammonia. Most people are pretty aware of that, but the good news is if it's lower temperature when you're dealing with liquid manures, it stays there longer. It doesn't volatilize as fast. With solid manure, it's pretty much the same because you lose it before the 7 days. So I know there are ordinances like county ordinances in the state of Nebraska. I don't know about what's right here locally, but there are some that say it has to be incorporated within 30 days. Not based in science whatsoever. That's totally a neighbor issue. And manure definitely has its neighbor issues, as we all are aware. But that's not going to help you if you incorporate it after 30 days. It's not helping you in any way other than maybe keeping the neighbors happy. What's that? Oh, no, that's fine. All right, with organic nitrogen, so the two forms, I should have probably specified this before. When you're looking at a soil test, what type of nitrogen are we looking at? We've been talking about it all day. In soils. Nitrate nitrogen, right? So when we're looking at manure, we don't generally look at nitrate nitrogen because there isn't usually much there. It hasn't converted over to that nitrate form yet. So the nice part about manure is that it's sort of your slow release fertilizer. So I don't know that I would say it's necessarily equivalent to those enhanced efficiency fertilizers, but it's right there with you. You know, you get a certain amount of it the first year and then you continue to get it for the next couple of years. And that's what this is getting at. So the first year you get roughly 40% depending on your manure. Majority of manures, this is the big change for this year, is that it's 40% available for almost all manures. In years past, we talked about 25% for beef manure and 35% for liquid or for swine manure. We changed that based on the updated research. We've spent Charlie Wortman and some others did a bunch of research and found that majority of them, our numbers were too conservative. And so we are getting about 40% of that nitrogen, organic nitrogen available. With the exception of layer manure, which we use 45%, and composted feedlot manure, which we only use 15%. This bottom part is what we talk about as our slow release portion. So this organic nitrogen is what comes available next year. So if you're basing it on that 40%, about half again as much is available the next year. So if you've got 40% this year, 20% next, 10% the year after that. It's all based on that soil test or that manure test that you're hopefully doing already. All right. And then, so I like to personally just use 100% available for both phosphorus and potassium, because most of the time we're over applying those nutrients anyway, and they will come available over time. But for first year, our UNL recommendation is 70% of that phosphorus available and 80% of the potash is available the first year. So now we're going to go to an example. You have this manure analysis in front of you. This is from my own farm. We have 45 head of cow-calf pairs. We just bought some. And so this manure analysis is a couple of years old. And that is incredibly out of focus. Did you know that?
I see that.
I can't read it. I happen to know that there are 13.7 pounds of organic nitrogen available in my manure, and 0.1 pounds of ammonium nitrogen in my manure. And then phosphorus and potash you can also look at. So these are the numbers we're going to use. I have, again, it's a cow-calf operation, so I'm using that 40% like we talked about at the top. And we're looking at the organic and ammonium nitrogen. When we look at a manure analysis, we always look at this as is basis. Why is that? Anybody know?
You're hauling it out there.
That's what you're hauling it out there. Nobody hauls on a dry basis, right? But what about this available the first year? Ward Labs gives that. I don't know that every lab does. Ward used to be really close with what the university recommendation is, but because our recommendations changed, they are no longer the same. So don't use the available the first year. One, you don't know how they calculated it. With going with an as-is basis, you know exactly what you did. So, and this just has the first year. It doesn't tell you what's available next year, right? So using this as-is basis, we're going to go through this worksheet. That's right. I'll go through the example first. For those of you online, it's the one with the green stripe at the top. It says credits worksheet, manure credit. It looks just like what's on the screen. So using my manure analysis, you're going to go, you're going to fill in where it says from the as-is sample, that is 0.1 for ammonium nitrogen. And then we're going to look up in table 1. I am broadcasting my manure. Am I worried about 0.1 pounds of nitrogen from ammonium? You think I can get that back out of the diesel fuel that I spent applying it or incorporating it? Probably not. So I am just broadcasting it on the surface. So I'm not going to get any of that ammonium. So 0 times 0.1, easy math, 0, right? All right. So then step 2, we're going to look at table 2 to calculate that organic portion. So like I said, we're going to use that 0.4 because most manures are 40% available the first year, times my sample, which is 13.7. And that comes out to be 5.5. So then we add those two together, 0 plus 5.5. And I just realized that apparently I printed the old copy of this without the updated. That should not say 36 there. 0 plus 5.5 is not 36. It is what? 5.5, right. So I'm going to assume that my fertility recommendation turned out to be about 200 pounds of nitrogen. That would be based on what we calculated with the nitrate rate calculator this morning. It's just a best guess for mine. So at 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre, if I wanted to apply 100% of my nitrogen from manure, I would take that 200 divided by the amount that's available this year. So 200 divided by 5.5 is, that math is correct, by the way. I did double check it after I discovered that problem. Now, the thing is, and part of why we talk about nitrate nitrogen so much is because where does that nitrate go when we over apply? It goes down, right? So we don't want it going into the groundwater. So state rules for livestock operations, they all have to follow this. If you don't have your own livestock operation, for some reason, the rule doesn't apply to you. Not quite sure why. I'm not going to go to the regulators and tell them that you need more rules. So let's just do it right the first time. Don't apply more than your nitrate or nitrogen rate. And that's what we just calculated, is your nitrogen rate. Now the phosphorus rate, again, I like to use one just 100% available because it's going to be available in the future. So all I did was take my phosphorus removal for 2 years and put that in there. I figured 132 divided by how much of that phosphorus was going to be available. And if you look, or phosphorus was in my sample, and if you look, it's 8.7. So 132 divided by 8.7. And that would apply enough phosphorus for you for the year, or for 2 years is what I did. It depended upon how much you want to apply. 4 to 5 years worth of phosphorus is okay, as long as you're not in a situation where you're going to lose that phosphorus. You know, if you have super steep hills and you've got water bodies right nearby, you have an erosion problem, and you know that you're going to be losing that phosphorus, then maybe not 5 years worth, but you can apply more phosphorus than you need to. So generally, we're going to shoot for a rate that's somewhere between those two, unless you're a hog operation. And then remember, your rate cannot exceed nitrogen, can never exceed nitrogen. Okay, we got that? Questions? All right, now it's your turn to do it. We're gonna do, let me get the camera showing for the folks online. Plug in. Oh my goodness. It says that it needs a plug-in.
Of course it does.
Give it a second. Oh, there we go. All right. You should see it on that screen monitor. It's probably locked up now.
Just
See it on my screen, but I don't see it on your screen up there, Leslie.
Well, it's showing on here.
Yeah, you probably,
Well, they don't need to see it.
oh,
They're going to actually do it.
good, okay. we're
So
good
the
then.
folks online can see that now. So you're going to use that field information card. Each of you have something different. All right, everybody show me their cell phones. We're going to do math now. If you don't have one, find a neighbor. What's that? A half sheet? A hog sheet? We had, did everybody get one of these? Or did I run out?
I got a beef.
Then I ran out. I only had a few of each. So the process is the same. We'll share out. Okay. So you're going to go through this worksheet for your livestock operation that you chose. This is your manure analysis. You see the as-is basis. Hopefully your crop available comes out to be similar in that second line as you calculate. And holler if you have questions. Your fertility recommendations are at the bottom of your field information
So they
card.
should be filling out the
They're
purple.
doing the purple sheet. Yes.
The sheet that's purple on
This one.
top is the one you're filling out.
This one up here. I will come around and help you. You're supposed to be doing the purple one too.
Have to be math. You're
Yeah,
struggling.
math is good.
I didn't give you one? Well, here.
Oh, you've been walking around.
Oh, see?
Don't share.
I showed you.
Looks like you're broadcasting. So availability, you're not incorporating. Just like the example was. And then we'll take that as is sample from here. Yeah. You have the possibility of using the Manure? You don't currently? Well, maybe you should. Well, if you'll learn how much that you save your fertilizer costs. No, that's what we calculated. This is your time frame. That would be all of your negative based on this. So the organic, that's what we calculate now. Yeah, go ahead and use that Manure analysis. Look, do they give you an analysis? Okay, they just started. Have them give you an analysis. They should be able to provide that. They just ask that. They should have that here. Most of them. They have to have that. They have to give it to you. So. They say they have to give it. So, then. Yeah, so you are going to, this is your fertility recommendation, that's the purpose of this. And then we'll go ahead and. Yeah.
This is
Part of it.
This is your hormone This is your hand. This will come out of zero again, but this, okay, this actually goes up. to 20% back, yeah. Yep. Looks like it could be. I don't know off the top of my head. Are we getting there? Thank you. Yep. Trying. All right, do we have a nitrogen rate for beef manure? Anybody? Nobody's got a beef manure nitrogen rate.
That's 0.
0? You're not applying beef manure then, huh?
7.6.
7.6
Whoa.
tons per acre?
Yeah.
We're looking at the last part of step 4. You've got it here. You calculated 26 tons per acre.
6.31.
For which operation were you? You were a beef? Okay, it might be a different field because I have different fields across the room. Anybody else for beef manure?
15.
15, 1, 10.
Livestock, yeah.
They're all over
No,
the place
cow-calf
because of why?
operation.
Because that fertility recommendation is different. Whether or not that you're incorporating is different. So how about for phosphorus? What did we find? What was that rate? You got 4.8.
What is your name?
What'd you get?
4.8.
Okay, anybody else?
I don't know you, I guess.
All right, how about for swine? What did we end up? Everything is in 1,000 gallons, by the way. So if you get like a 2 point something, that's okay. It's actually 2,000 something.
2,500.
2560.
Mhm.
Okay. That's what you came up with too, or something similar? Somebody said yes, I thought I heard. Anybody? 2.3, okay. 2,300 gallons.
Thank you, sir.
How about for phosphorus? What did you come up with? 3,300, okay. Are you applying at that rate?
No.
Nope. Why? It's too much. It's more than we need of nitrogen. Because we're gonna leach that nitrogen if we apply that much. All right. I was gonna have you calculate the fertilizer value. I will tell you, I will explain the top part of that. It's still not sharing.
Yeah, he enjoyed his
Can I just share this?
horses and mules.
Yeah, that's probably better. We're looking at the green sheet now that says manure's real agronomic value worksheet. And I'll just kind of go through an example because I want to get outside and finish before you all want to leave here in 15 minutes, right? Nobody wants to stay after class, right? All right. You're welcome to stay after class. I'll talk poop all day. I'm good with that. All right, so if you were applying to a cornfield, which is what you're going to do on all of the fields that I handed out to you, if we're going to reduce our fertilizer nitrogen because of our manure, yes, we're going to get credit for it. For phosphorus, if our soil test is below 20 parts per million, again, I have that filled in on this field information card. So you can look at that. If that is below that 20 parts per million, then yes, we'll get credit for that phosphorus. And for potassium, if we're below 125 parts per million, yes, we're going to get credit for that. And then all you're going to do here, and you can do this on your own time, but essentially you're going to total up the nutrients that you have of value. So if your soil test is below these thresholds, and you're going to need that nitrogen and you're going to reduce your fertilizer costs to match it, then you're going to fill in that dollar value, which are on that potential fertilizer value. I punched in the nutrient values from yesterday when I called the co-op for those. So those are relatively reasonable numbers, whereas they weren't last week when I saw you guys. Or 2 weeks ago when I saw you guys. So that potential fertilizer value is there, added up for the nutrients that you have of value. And that'll give you that amount per ton or per 1,000 gallons, depending on which type of manure you have. Then you take that times your application rate in order to know what that dollar value is per acre. So this walks you through how to do that. Stay after class if you want to learn how really in depth, because I will gladly walk you through it. But for now, you determined those fertilizer rates. Let's go outside. How do you know how much manure that you've applied? Flow meter, weigh it.
Uncle. Your uncle.
You ask your uncle?
No.
All right, we're gonna step outside. I'm gonna show you one way that you can calibrate a solid manure spreader. And then we'll come back in here and bring it together so that we can finish up the evaluation. So you can leave your stuff in the room. Real quickly, what affects application rates other than how fast you dump the bucket, right? What affects that rate?
He go across.
How fast you're driving, how much your equipment, what's your condition of your equipment, whether if you're in a liquid system, the pressure that you're running, and gate openings, chain speed, and your spread width. How uniform was that manure that he applied?
Pretty good.
It wasn't too bad. It was pretty spotty, really. Come on. If you go over it and it looks spotty like that, how do you handle that? So most of the time you'll find manure spreader will be heavier in the middle, right? If anybody's familiar with it. So how do you account for that? What's that?
Every time the apron drops, it's gonna be heavier there also.
It's also going to be heavier at the beginning, right?
Take a couple samples and average.
Yep. So we would put up multiple sheets out there so that we get a good average of how much we've applied. The other piece of that is if you're heavy in the middle and you're lighter on the side, overlap so that it's equal all the way across as best as you can. Remember, it's never okay to go over that nitrogen rate and never apply more than what you need unless you're going to be able to use it later. Because what happens? You're money down the drain, right? Calibrated already. So bottom line, know what your crops need. Know what your soil has. We talked about that this morning. And then know what your manure actually provides. So get that sample. If you need help with the manure sample, holler. I'm glad to come out and do that or help you with that. Know what rate you're going for and then verify that rate and adjust your spreader settings accordingly. I am done. And I'll stick around for a while after if you got questions.